This is AIM Agenda. With me now, Tim Wilson, Peter Khalil. Gentlemen, good to see you both. This news, breaking news this morning, $400 million from Twiggy Forrest to be committed today alongside Bill Shorten and Malcolm Turnbull. Peter, your thoughts on that? The money to be spent on boosting cancer research, support for Indigenous communities, community building, arts, PhD. It's a big whack, isn't it, $400 million?
Well, it's fantastic, Kieran, and I think great to see that bit of bipartisanship to start the week with the leaders, and very generous from Twiggy Forrest. And, you know, it's interesting, though, that, you know, philanthropy, there's a history of philanthropy in Australia, but it's not as large as you get, say, in the US, where there's a lot of tradition around philanthropy and people putting in a lot of money into charity. We do a lot of volunteering in Australia. We do a lot of charity work. We're great volunteers. I think we're the best in the world, but big philanthropy like this announcement by Forrest is something that's sort of more US-like, isn't it?
It does certainly sound like that. Tim, your thoughts on that?
Well, every country goes through a stage of accumulating wealth, and then people who have it are able to donate and contribute it. So I'm hoping it's the start of a trend, frankly, where you have people who've done very well throughout their life, and a mixture of they want their children, for instance, to be able to go off and make their own wicket and live their own life and their own success. But in addition to that, they want to help and support others. So everybody welcomes this as a trend. It's a great encouragement, and Andrew Forrest deserves full congratulations.
Indeed. Let's get a couple of quick thoughts as well on the story we led with this morning, Trump in the Middle East. Very different to the rhetoric we heard in the campaign, Peter Khalil.
Yeah, well, it's a campaign Trump versus President Trump is very different. I mean, he was out there being very critical of Saudi Arabia, talking about LGBTI rights being trampled upon, the human rights abuses there, gender issues, and now very friendly with the Saudis. And I think the strategic shift is interesting too, because Obama had been distancing the US from the Saudis on a whole number of fronts, particularly through the deal with Iran, which is the sort of arch rival of Saudi Arabia and the other Sunni states in the region. And you've seen this reverse somewhat with this very big deal that Trump's made with the Saudis. Look, on Saudi Arabia, let's not forget, this is a country that has promulgated the Wahhabist sect of Islam, very virulent and extreme sect of Islam, which has spawned the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. It's the ideological father, if you like, of all of those movements. So there are real problems with and have been with Saudi Arabia and what they've been doing internationally in this space. But they have acted as a counterweight to some of the Shia extremists like Hezbollah and the Iranian regime in the region as well.
But I think that's what you take out of the trip is really Trump's going there to actually appeal to Saudi Arabia and other countries to be responsible citizens, to not foster this type of activity and actually provide a counterbalance, because, of course, they're at the front lines, not just them, but other countries in the region is dealing with extremism. And this is actually what we need, a responsible US president calling out people to stand up and join the fight internationally against this type of extremism.
Anything to take the attention off the dramas at home right now as well. So I hope, I'm sure he's hoping that's the case. Peter, let's look at some domestic politics. The Medicare levy. As it was put to me by one of your colleagues, that this debate about the Medicare levy, whether you should or shouldn't back it, James Massola reports today that a majority of Shadow Cabinet thought you should support the across-the-board Medicare levy increase. And as it was put to me, the argument is that if you've got the government supporting the universality of Medicare and embracing Medicare, that's not the time then to diminish that universality where everyone contributes, everyone benefits, which you're doing right now as part of suggesting that the Medicare levy should only increase for a section of the community.
Look, I actually think, well, I disagree with you, Kieran. I actually think the decision was a very good decision made by Shadow Cabinet, the leadership group, demonstrated a good decision-making process. Obviously, everyone was involved in that, and the budget budget matters are taken very seriously through the Shadow Cabinet process. Being able to limit the Medicare levy to the top two tax brackets saves around 10 million Australians from a tax cut, about 80% of Australians from a tax cut, a tax rise, I should say. And that is actually better for the budget bottom line of $4.5 billion.
And better for the universality of the Medicare system, which Labor argues so strongly for.
This is about funding the NDIS, and NDIS is part of Labor DNA, invented it, put it forward, worked on it, passionate about it, and we are completely committed to it. And being able to make sure that that is funded is a primary objective, and it's been done in a very clever way. by limiting the levy increase to the top two tax brackets, effectively, of Australians, and saving 10 million Australians from a tax increase.
Tim, your reflections on what you've obviously hard to know what's going on from the Labor perspective from your point of view, but your reflections on where this debate is at.
Well, what we know, firstly, is this is another one of the cracks that's emerging in the shadow cabinet around basically whether they're going to be responsible as an opposition in dealing with the problems that affect the country, or whether they're going to play politics. Now, this is a purely political decision, because what they want to go out there, Labor has gone out there and done, is said we want to focus where the levy is going to be applied, to try and focus this idea of class envy and class rhetoric against wealthy people. Now, that's a choice, but in the end, they're playing politics off the back of the lives and support structures of people with a disability.
That's just
that is actually the reality of what the decision that's actually been made. What we have said is that if you want universality, and this is where we've moved on from the politics of it, we want universality. We want every Australian to enjoy equal protection if they're in a situation outside of their circumstances where they need extra support. Then we're prepared to turn to every Australian and say you have an obligation to help support them.
You've got a situation where
I've got to respond to that. I'm sorry.
No, you can, but the point is that at the moment the coalition, it's almost a reverse of where we were in the election campaign. The coalition is the one who is more strongly arguing for the universality of the Medicare medical system. Surely the NDIS...
If anybody can take out of the system, surely they have some sort of obligation to contribute to it.
Okay, you talk about... I mean, I was all friendly with you this morning, Tim, and you've ruined it, because you start bringing in politics and you run this whole line that I've heard from the coalition government about class warfare. Really? We've started class warfare. Who fired the first shot? You guys have put a $65 billion tax cut for multinationals. You've made most Australians who are on 65K pay $325 more in tax, while a millionaire pays $16,500, gets $16,500 back in their pocket. Who started the class warfare? It's absolutely ridiculous. And it is absolutely obscene that you run around saying class warfare, Labor's talking about class warfare, when you are actually hitting the poorest, the most vulnerable, students, pensioners, and people who are on Centrelink to try and by the way, 40% of the so-called debts that you're chasing were actually incorrect. You put money into the pockets of billionaires, millionaires and multinationals.
The outrage that you were just expressing. Firstly, we're dealing with the issue of universality. Secondly, the tax
that's what it is about.
On business actually trying to attract capital and actually create jobs for people.
Trickle down economics.
Well, the reality
that's what you keep hanging your hat on.
You don't care these days about jobs. Labor doesn't actually go out there and push for jobs.
We do care about jobs.
We actually want people to invest in building in this country's future. And we're looking at how we can make sure that we can secure the employment for the next generation of Australians.
Gentlemen, we're out of time. Good to see you both.
Well, it's also actually true, unlike by the way, Kieran, just before
you'll continue your conversation outside. Thanks, appreciate that.
Don't suck up to the teacher.
He's right, though.
I'm bringing you an apple next time.
Good. A quick break, back in just a